It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
Zag Insiders Jim Meehan and John Blanchett step away from the paper and up to the microphone to give you the biggest storylines. It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders podcast.
Here we go.
Good Monday morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Spokesman-Review's Gonzaga Zags Basketball Insiders podcast. This is the third edition. Let's introduce this starting lineup here. Richard Fox, a television analyst for Gonzaga basketball on SWX, KHQ, and Root. And John Blanchett, the Hall of Fame columnist of the Spokesman-Review. I'm Jim Meehan. I cover Gonzaga for the paper, have for about 15 years. Now that threesome, fellas, should that be in the Hoop Fest media division? Should we get together and make it happen?
Well, I think it depends on our ringer, who would be Richard. I don't think, I'm not sure that you or I add a whole lot to the equation there, Jim.
My guess is none of us would make it past the first game.
All I know is it'd be throw it to the post. Throw it to the post. And that's you, Richard. Not us. All right. Well, let's go back through the week that was. Gonzaga kind of doing what they've been doing all year in the WCC, taking teams apart. Good ones, bad ones, doesn't matter. That margin's usually in the 25 to 35 point range. And it was again at San Diego on Thursday. Pretty easy victory over the Toreros, who've had a nice start to the conference season. They had 6 wins coming in. Lost twice last week, so they're down to 6-5. But Zags took it to them pretty much from the get-go, even though it's an improved San Diego team, just not enough horses for what Gonzaga put out there, John.
No, and I think as we noted last week that, San Diego's strides have come against the lower end teams in the conference, and that's fine. I mean, given where they were, you make your baby steps, but their limitations were exposed against Gonzaga, and to really no surprise. But I also thought they showed some fight that maybe we hadn't seen out of them. A year ago, it was a roster that Sam Scholl had filled with 5 transfers, basically, and they didn't work out. Those transfers didn't work out. He came back and did it again, and this group fits a little bit better, and they seem to have a little more sick'em to them. So I thought that was a game it wasn't close, but it was competitive in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego has definitely made strides, and it's happens for a good guy. Sam Scholl is one of the good guys in the coaching industry. I think coaches around the WCC will tell you that. And he's got it going at the right time. I think there was probably some pressure to get it going. And I think with what he's done through the first half of the conference season, a little beyond, he's done a nice job there. So, Richard, thought on San Diego, and then maybe just go right into BYU and what you saw. Chet Holmgren, well, just about every Zag having their way with the Cougars in Provo. Electric atmosphere, but it wasn't electric for long out there. Gonzaga unplugged that crowd pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'd echo what John said. I thought, it's a 30-point win, but I did think San Diego had a lot more fight in them than I anticipated. And he is a good coach. But you just see the horses Gonzaga has over 40 minutes. It's just a tall order for anybody in our conference to keep pace. It just shows you how important it is to try to control the pace and the tempo of the game against Gonzaga. If it gets away from you, they can effectively end the game in 90 seconds, 2 minutes with what they can do offensively. Yeah, I mean, that BYU game, I know we're going to get into it a little bit later, but that's a true road game in a really hostile environment. You talked about it last week, Jim. And they were talking about that over the telecast too, just about the shock that it's going to be for Big 12 folks when they actually go to Provo for the first time. I mean, that's a big time atmosphere. Yeah. And, other than a couple of plays in the second half where, or late in the first half and in the second half when, BYU hit a couple of shots and the crowd tried to get into it, you don't hear that gym that quiet that often. So really impressive win. I mean, I think it's Holmgren first, And then Nemhard is we're talking about what he did over the weekend and quite frankly all year long. And then just the rest of the guys. It's been really remarkable how well they've been playing on both ends.
Yeah, that went very smoothly for the Zags and a little bit smoother than my trip home from Salt Lake City on Sunday. That turned into Monday morning somehow. We're going to do a quick recap of the covering the Zags is glamorous, as you guys know. And this is the other side of that glamour. Got diverted from Salt Lake, supposed to go to Portland, ended up in Medford. It was beautiful in Medford. It was beautiful all over the West Coast, but there was some layer of dense fog in Portland that turned my day into about a 10 hours more than it should have. Anyway, got back to Portland, got delayed, couldn't get on earlier flights. They were packed and got to the doorstep at about 1:30 a.m. So I would ask you guys as veteran Zag travelers, give me your best, worst road trip covering the Zags. Richard, what you got?
When I was in Colorado, as you guys probably remember, Oklahoma State had that terrible tragedy where they had that plane crash, and we actually played them the day of. They played us. And so when that happened, everybody in the conference really panicked because everyone flew the same type of planes, basically these really small propeller planes, and you're flying into Kansas, Nebraska, and just it can get a little bit challenging trying to land some of these lighter aircraft with some of the wind that we had. So of course we're playing K-State the next game, and it's decided that we're going to bus, which is about 7 hours or so, and they call it 8 hours in a bus. So we leave in the morning and we're driving, it's fine. And all of a sudden we just get hit with this massive snowstorm, shut down the highway. We've got nowhere to go. My coach, let's just say he wasn't, he struggled with the changing of any plans that he, didn't control. We had to stop and divert and basically just stay, at like a Perkins for hours because the freeway's closed. We're supposed to get to Manhattan and play the next day. So we didn't get in till well after midnight. And I just remember how tired we were the next day. Of course, there was no changing of the plan the next day. We still had to have shoot around at the same time and still had to do everything as if we'd gotten in at the right time. But, that was a long trip for a lot of reasons. So that one stands out for sure. It wasn't a team that was a lot of fun to be on. And so when you're stuck on a bus and at Perkins for hours on end, it was a long day.
Yeah. Well, John, we've traveled a lot together to various things, and you can't use this for your Zag story, but I do recall getting waylaid by that snowstorm in Seattle after a battle in Seattle. Or was it that, or was it the Green Bay Monday Night Football game where it snowed and they didn't have de-icer at SeaTac for like 2 days, so we were waylaid on the west side. What you got for your best Zags travel follies?
I've had my share of canceled flights but really my Zag travel's been pretty good for the most part. I do remember some sort of strange 4-rail carom shot, Minneapolis to Denver to Cincinnati I forget where the game was, but I had to go through that one time. My worst travel story is not a Zag story. It's a spring training story. And it doesn't have anything to do with flights or hotel or anything. It has to do with a car rental, because apparently I had neglected to nail down a confirmation on the car that I'd rented. And so when I showed up at the rental counter, there was no car. And it was spring break and Phoenix was flooded with people, and there were no cars to be had at any of the counters. So a photographer, Chris Anderson, and I wound up at what we have come to call Satan's Rent-A-Car, an off-site place that basically dealt with used cars that of a sketchy variety for insurance purposes and what have you. We wound up with a nice Buick that had a bullet hole in its trunk. It was definitely a bullet hole. There was just no question about it. The passenger side rear view was broken off. The driver's seat reclined at about 140-degree angle, so you could barely see over the top of the steering wheel. And there was a stain on the back seat that we're pretty sure was human blood. And for this
those are
vehicle,
all extras, John. Those are extras. They come
Right.
They come with the
for
car.
this vehicle, we paid $70 a day with a 5-day minimum. And this was 25 years ago. And we drove that car around Phoenix for spring training for 3 days while Chris made me any downtime at the hotel that we had. I had to dial all other rental counters across Phoenix until about 3 days into the trip, we finally found an available car and could take our car back to Satan's Rent-A-Car, which of course charged us the full price. So that's the funniest thing about it is later on going back and looking at their Yelp reviews where you'd see things like, I would rate them a 0 if possible, and had to use a knife to unlock the passenger side door, and feared doors would fly open at any minute. We weren't the only ones who had that experience at Satan's.
Bullet holes. That's
bullet hole in the trunk. There's no doubt about it.
All right, let's get back to the Zags. Seems to be one guy that's getting a lot of headlines. The Spokesman-Review has spilled a little ink on this guy the last week or two, all season really. Chet Holmgren takeover continues. The big man from Minneapolis, the 7-footer, the versatile skills, he's putting them all on the floor. Seems like every game now, but to a much larger degree. He has really become an issue for every team the Zags line up against. Has been all year, but I think we're seeing a more forceful, more aggressive Chet Holmgren. Results are showing, and opponents, Mark Pope, BYU coach, who played in the NBA, 6'10" forward, I think was pretty wowed by what he saw from the Gonzaga freshman. Richard, we'll start with you. Why is it happening now, and how really has it changed the look of the offense? The defense, he's been enormous in that lane all season, but
Right.
How is it changing how they look on the court right now?
Well, I mean, trying to get ready for the podcast today, what struck me the last 2 games or this past weekend was how assertive he was offensive. We've seen that now for a while.
Yeah.
But there's just he's not hesitating at all. It's, he has space or he's open, he's shooting it. Where I thought early in the year, he was certainly trying to fit in a little bit or, just blend into what Gonzaga had been doing and with how dominant Drew has been since he's been here, quite frankly. But even, this year, I really think he took a back seat. We haven't seen that. I mean, he has been uber aggressive. I mean, he's only taken 10 shots or more in 7 of their games this year. 3 of those have been the last 2 weeks. He's just much more assertive. And what it does for them offensively, besides giving them maybe the best 3-point shooter in the league at 60% in conference play, is it opens up so much of what the other things that they're trying to do. I think at some point over the next week or 2, I would certainly imagine with St. Mary's this upcoming weekend and down in the Bay Area when they play San Francisco and St. Mary's, those teams are better set up to actually try to do something about what, his damage on the perimeter. And that's at some point you're going to see what that stretching of the floor does for a guy like Drew or Bolton when he's trying to attack the rim, or Strother. I think right now teams have been okay conceding that jump shot a little bit because they just figure he's got to come back down a little bit with his averages, but he's that good. And we'll see it as we move through the year. We get particularly into the tournament. It just opens things up for everybody else. But he's been beyond what I think anybody really expected, at least, particularly when it comes to conference play. I mean, it's been remarkable.
Yeah, he is on a roll. Maybe just he's got 20 games under his belt. That's obviously going to help. And I think he's found his comfort zone and really just moved up on the player of the year rankings, all these things that come along with how he's playing. I remember talking to his high school coach at Minnehaha in Minneapolis. And I asked him what he thought Chet was worth, point-wise at the defensive end of the floor. He threw out the estimation, 40 points a game. And I thought, come on now, that's 40? And then I started thinking about it. He's probably blocking 8 shots a game. That's, depending on where it's from, 16, 18 points if it's 3-pointers. And then the way he explained it, which I think does have some validity, is that it's the shots that he alters and the shots that aren't taken. And there was a couple of those BYU guards go into the lane. One time, I can't remember, I think it was Gideon George, and he started to go up for a shot, and he saw Holmgren about 1.5 feet away, and he kind of readjusted and fired a pass, picked off, and there they go. So whatever that number is, it's a big impact what Chet's doing on the defensive end. John, he's entered some of these player of the year races. He wasn't really on those lists probably 2-3 weeks ago, but his emergence has changed that. What does that do to Drew Timmy's chances when you have 2 players? Do you cancel out votes for one or the other? And what are you seeing from Chet, this run that he's on that's really changed how the Zags look on the court right now?
Well, I think we got to be realistic. It's doubtful either of the Zags is going to win the National Player of the Year award. There's simply too much balance on the team, and they do kind of cancel each other out. Voters will weigh, well, would he be, he's not that dominant. And when you have players like Johnny Davis at Wisconsin and Kofi Coburn, Illinois, and Shibwe at Kentucky, those guys are more dominant or more beacon like of leaders of their team, I guess. And if Drew's having an off night, they're just as strong. The Zags are just as strong with Chet, or if both of them are having a bad night, you've got Andrew Nembhard, to pick up the slack. So, and let's not forget, it was all of 3 weeks ago that Timmy went for 30 and 32 in back-to-back games, and all of a sudden he's becoming the forgotten man nationally because of Chet's emergence. And that's natural. That's how these things work. I think more intriguing is going to be the WCC Player of the Year award, because Chet's doing this stuff against conference teams, and they're going to go, geez, we have no answer for him. He's leading the league in rebounding, block shots, field goal percentage, 3-point field goal percentage for anyone who's taken more than 3 a game. I mean, that's going to be an interesting vote in itself. He's changed things, and Richard's point about looking for his shot is really well taken, and how he was maybe deferring earlier. I loved his comment. He had the typical comment the other night after his game about, well, my teammates are looking for me more. And in and of itself, that's true. They are looking for him because they know who's hot. But then you see these sequences where he blocks a shot, controls the ball, brings it up court himself, puts it behind his back, and either pulls up for a 3 or drives it to the rim. He's looking for himself more too, and that's part and parcel of these big bursts that Gonzaga is having against teams, and it really does change the way teams have to guard, or in these cases that didn't guard him mostly this last week. And again, Richard made a real good point. When a better team like a St. Mary's or San Francisco, teams that play at a better pace, they'll have a plan. Whether it'll work, I don't know, but they'll certainly have a better plan than some of these other teams have.
Yeah. Well, if you guys are okay with it, I'll ask him to join our Hoop Fest team.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Yeah,
okay. Get him some
We don't have to be on the
opportunities.
court the whole time. We can take some breathers. So
Can you line up some NIL opportunities for him too to sweeten that pot?
I'll look into that, and I'm thinking of it. Nembhard would be good too. We could get a ball handler.
Yeah, I don't have to come in the game. That's fine.
I was gonna say I could just come watch. I don't need to be on the team.
I think the best thing Chet did last week was there was apparently Mark Few did a halftime, leave the court interview at halftime at BYU. They're up 25 or whatever it was. And he was asked about Chet, and Chet had 13 and 10. He already had a double-double at that point, but he mentioned a couple of dubious decisions at the end of the half where he had turnovers. And somebody on Twitter, you guys won't believe this, somebody made a snide remark about Mark, nitpicking Chet's game, and taskmaster Mark as always. And Chet actually replied and said, as he should, 3 turnovers in 2 minutes can't happen. So supporting his coach And I think that's an underrated value, and especially in great players.
Yeah.
They all have that desire to, have their flaws pointed out and work on them and accept coaching. And he, just like Jalen last year,
Right.
very willing learners and take those words to heart. So well, let's move on. We'll do a little more on BYU. That win, 90-57. That's the second time the Zags have just taken apart BYU. I think it was 110-84 in the McCarthy. So that dismantling, let's weigh it against the ones over ranked opponents. You've got the UCLA game where the Zags were up like 21 before the midpoint of the first half. You've got Texas where they led by 20 at half. And kind of the undervalued one that's really gaining some steam is Texas Tech, which has cracked the top 10. When I was watching that live in Phoenix, I did not think I'd be saying that, but there they are. That's turned into a great win, and that's a great team. I mean, the way they guard, they are a pain in the wallet, just trying to score on them. I know BYU doesn't have that top 25 ranking, but that was a top 35 team in the net when the Zags did that. What do you guys consider the most impressive win of the year, and maybe just the most impressive play by the Zags? I think both ends of the floor against BYU was, off the charts. What would you guys side with? We'll go with you, Foxy.
Yeah, I think I leaned to the BYU game only because it's a true road game.
Yeah.
I was at that UCLA game, and UCLA's been kind of up and down this year. I mean, they're still top 10. They're very good. Texas Tech, I'm with you, Jim. I thought it was a good one at the time. I didn't expect them to do what they've done, but they certainly will. They may be the best defensive team in the country.
Yeah.
And we saw that a little bit. I mean, Holmgren and Timmy didn't do much in that game, just given how they like to defend. But I don't know. I was really impressed with the BYU game. You're in a non-conference, even though they've got some, I don't know how many teams they played this year that were either in their first year or second or third year of Division One. But you're kind of in that rhythm. You're playing big time games relatively consistently. You're accustomed to that speed, that athleticism, that level of play. But, to start conference, I mean, they've been so dominant. Half of me expected them to go into BYU and win the game, but maybe I was expecting it to be somewhat competitive, just given the environment. And BYU, despite what they've done the last couple of weeks, is a good team. They've got some players, and just the way that they dominated them for 40 minutes and to do it where they did it, I think that was the most impressive. Maybe it's recency bias, but I certainly think it was the most impressive win of the year, just given all of the context surrounding it and where we are in the year with 5 weeks left, essentially, until Selection Sunday.
Well, it was impressive. I'd probably go with UCLA because that was a 1-2 matchup on a neutral floor, and just that first, I think it was 29-8. And that was the game Andrew Nemhard just took over. Looked like he was controlling it with puppet strings. I'm going to do this and this, and it worked out perfectly. But they've got a pretty good body of work, some candidates to choose from. John, what stuck in your memory as the best stretch by the Zags?
Well, you can't. The BYU game aesthetically is off the charts. I mean, largely because of the Holmgren factor, but they were so smooth at both ends. And put the game away so fast and then sustained it basically until that stretch where they gave up that run in the second half. So, the aesthetics of that, it's hard to argue with. I do think that that's a wounded BYU team, both physically and emotionally. And even though they did have that crowd of 18,000 behind them, at least for a little while, it's just not one of their better teams down there at this point. I would go with Texas Tech because of the body of work that Texas Tech has gone with. The UCLA game, again, high-powered teams, but they didn't have Cody Riley at the time.
Yeah.
Tech has beaten Tennessee, Kansas, Baylor, Iowa State, and Texas. They're a tough team to play. They are a great defensive team. They junk it up. And I think that makes it the most impressive victory on their slate right now. I think maybe UCLA has a higher upside, possibly, even though, as you point out, Tech's in the top 10 now. But I think the parts that UCLA give them maybe a little more of an upside. But I like the Tech win and what they needed to do to pull it out.
Yeah, playing Texas Tech is a toothache waiting to happen. I think they just grind on you and shut down that lane. Let's talk a little more about BYU. They've really hit some hard times here. 4 straight losses. That hadn't happened since Dave Rose, nearly a decade ago, was the head coach at BYU. The lost at Pacific, lost at Santa Clara, lost at home to San Francisco, and got beat 14 in that game. And then the Zags put it on them pretty good the other night. Played without Tajon Lucas. Very nice player, point guard, does quite a few things for him, leading assist guy, gets others involved, scores about 10 a game, second behind Alex Barcelo. So that should be noted. But their fall here, we hear this every 5 minutes on Twitter, the forbid WCC conference. We've been a little skeptical of that, but I think for sure 3 teams are looking pretty solid. I think USF, maybe with one more marquee win, can get into the single digits and not have to sleep uncomfortable the night before selection Sunday. And St. Mary's is now ranked in the top 22, and they're just chugging along, knocking off at WCC teams. They come to the McCarthy this week. So, but BYU's fall for grace here is really put them on the bubble. Still projected in by most folks. What has happened to the BYU we saw earlier in the season and what we're seeing now? What any theories on what has gone wrong for the Cougars, Foxy?
Well, I mean, certainly injuries. I think Lucas is a fine player, but it's not. I'm not sure that would have moved the needle all that much on Saturday night. I think it was Baxter, one of their front court players, got hurt early in the year. And that's really been where BYU historically has been able to give Gonzaga a game, is inside. You think of guys like Brandon Davies and others who just physically could play with Gonzaga's front court in a way that nobody else in the league really had. I mean, you might have 1 or 2 guys, scattered around the league that were physically able to do that, but they typically had a collection of front court players that could kind of neutralize what Gonzaga wanted to do inside, and enough shooting. I think John's point earlier is on point and worth probably saying again. This is not a classic BYU team. This is not one of those teams that had the Haas and was it Collinsworth, their big guard, but I still am hard pressed to think of a team with expectations in the conference that's had a worse couple weeks. Especially 2 weekends ago, they lost 2 games by 4 points, and that's the nature of the game sometimes. Certainly Gonzaga's been on that end of it as well in some of their non-conference games over the years. But, if you've got real ambitions to play in the tournament and you're in this conference, those are the games you've got to win. And and sometimes, that the mental psyche of a team is pretty fragile. You don't always think it. But a couple of bad losses like that, and I think it just carried over to this last weekend. And it's going to be important for Pope and his staff to stop the bleeding this week. They can't afford to lose another game, in my opinion.
John, where do you think the Cougars turn to for answers to get this turned around?
Mark Pope has said something after the game that they need to reinvent themselves. That's a hard thing to do in February. But he's right. I mean, they're out there trying to guard either Drew Timme or Chet Holmgren with a guy like Gideon George. Yeah. Traditionally they have had like 4 big guys they could run at you with fouls and do some damage that way. But they don't have that personnel anymore. So I'm not sure how you reinvent yourself. One way would be to get Caleb Lohner going somehow. He has, since the Gonzaga game, where he played very well, after sparking a little controversy by saying everyone hates Gonzaga. He couldn't have looked worse in this past game, and he's arguably their second best player, or should be. And when the Zags do as good a job as they've done on Alex Barcelo, he's got to come. Lohner has to come through. They've got to get something out of him. I don't know if it's a chemistry issue. I think it's a fragile psyche issue with this team, in how they've responded to those close losses that Richard referred to. You could see Barcelo trying to lead out there a little bit. I know at timeout, he was kind of barking at his teammates, trying to get them to respond. There really was no response. They don't have, I don't know, they don't have that resolve right now that you need in a team. And they're going to have to find it if they're going to do this reinvention that Mark Pope talks about.
That is true, or the four-bid WCC might not be on Selection Sunday. Big week coming up for Gonzaga. First against Pacific on Thursday. The old Idaho Vandal head coach Leonard Perry brings the Tigers into the McCarthy Athletic Center, followed by the big one Saturday. St. Mary's Gales, number 22 in the country. They're one game behind Gonzaga in the standings. And if that doesn't describe the WCC battles from the last decade and a half, Gonzaga, St. Mary's back and forth, that is what it is again this year. We'll start with you, John. Pacific first up, probably on paper, not expected to be close. They will, I believe, too, try to control the tempo like a lot of teams do against the Zags. Maybe a thought on Pacific, and then a thought on playing the real control team, that's St. Mary's Gales.
Well, I hate to be the guy that overlooks the Thursday game for the Saturday game, but I'll be frank. I mean, you just don't see much reason to tune in on Thursday.
Hey, you're hurting Foxy's feelings here now.
Except
I don't have that game. At least I don't think I have that game.
Except to see what Chet Holmgren might do this week against them. I really don't have much of a feel for the Tigers. They're a team with a lot of new faces again, with a new head coach trying to build on what Damon Stoudemire did. And there's a guy who injected some sikkim into that program, and maybe you saw some residual effects of that with that win over BYU last week or a week ago. That there's still a little fight in them, but their most potent players from recent times are gone, and they're trying to find, I think, some rhythm and their own identity to a certain extent. As for St. Mary's, well, God love Randy Bennett. He seems to do this kind of thing, if not every year. I mean, he certainly didn't do it last year. Last year was kind of the anomaly. That team was the worst shooting, worst offensive St. Mary's team I've seen since his first year at St. Mary's, I think. But they've, put things together. Their shooting is up to about 46% from the field. I think they're up to 35% from three, which is not the heights that St. Mary's has recently functioned at, but it's solid. They play at the kind of pace that can keep them in games, and they're probably a better defensive team than they've been in a while. I noticed the development of Matthias Toss inside. It's kind of been a slow process, but of late, in the last month, he's playing as well as almost anybody in the league, with the exception of one guy at Gonzaga, I think. And they have their other moments. And of course, we're going to see Tommy Kuzi in his 8th Boffo year at St. Mary's, it seems like. I'm pretty sure he's a Gale for life. And I think he's got perpetual eligibility. So it'll be fun to see Randy match wits again and see if he can grind things down to the point where they can stay, within shouting distance.
Yeah, the pace is going to be slower. There won't be a high possession game. St. Mary's wants it in the 50s, 60s. Gonzaga wants it 80s, 90s, and up. So it'll be a battle for tempo, but St. Mary's will lower the possession just by milking the shot clock. That's inevitable. Richard, what does that game come down to in your mind?
Tempo, pace. Who can make the other uncomfortable with just the pace of the game? And you guys have already talked about it. St. Mary's is going to want to slow it down. It's going to feel like a walk for Gonzaga during stretches. Just they are not going to be in a hurry. Over under 4.5 times they look to push it in transition. I'm going to go under for St. Mary's. They're going to want to grind it out. And the thing about them this year, I mean, first off, Bennett's an exceptional coach. You know, I know he's not the most popular guy in Gonzaga country, but you have to give the guy his credit. He has had some great teams down there, and he's been, other than GU, the most consistent program in the conference. They shoot it better, to John's point. You know, they're I think in conference they're shooting 38% from three, and they're really right behind Gonzaga in just about every offensive category, and then just behind GU in just about every defensive category. So I'll be fascinated to see, you know, and it's hard. That's the thing that's difficult about GU. You may be able to control that pace or that tempo for the first half or even the first 25, 30 minutes. But for a team like St. Mary's, do they have enough firepower to make a run if Gonzaga just pull out 8, 10, 12 points? Do they have enough firepower and the ability to maybe loosen the reins a little bit offensively to try to get back in the game and then retake control of the tempo? I just don't know. That's always been hard for everybody in the league, but for St. Mary's as well. Unlike Gonzaga, they can't play more than one way, really. You know, we've seen Gonzaga win, you know, in a variety of ways. I mean, Gonzaga may not prefer to play that way, but if it's going to be a slugfest, they can do that, and they will do that, and they can find a way to win those games. If the game gets a bit more up tempo, I'm not sure St. Mary's has enough to play that way.
Yeah, it's the running football team that finds itself 3 touchdowns behind, and you know,
Right.
Can they catch up? So
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how St. Mary's defense, underrated defense, does trying to hold down Gonzaga and all those weapons. They will try to make you shoot over them. They will contest, but it's going to be interesting to see how the Zags function offensively against St. Mary's on Saturday night. Well, that's going to do it for the third show, the Zags Basketball Insiders podcast. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, on the Spokesman-Review website on the Zags page. So check us out. My thanks to Richard Fox, to John Blanchett, our master engineer / photographer, Jesse Tinsley. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next Monday.